Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiT Photo, episode number 63 with Catherine Hall and Leo Laporte, recorded on June 26, 2012. Architectural photography with Shannon McGrath.
It's time for TWiT Photo this week in photography with our wonderful host, Catherine Hall, and a great guest today. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. CatherineHall.net is your website, and do you have a blog post for us this week?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's turning no into yes.
That's kind of appropriate. There it is.
Yeah, it
turning
is.
no
It's
into yes.
More levels than.
So what do you mean by that?
What I mean is a lot of times, I guess this applies to life, in a lot of areas, but in photography itself, specifically when shooting portraits, in personal work, a lot of times you want to photograph somebody and they may not know you. You find them on the street, you're traveling, whatever, and they're kind of like, I don't think so. I don't want you to take my photo.
Right.
And what I've found is that more often it's not so much that they don't want you to take their photo, they just don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And they don't trust you.
For most people, no's a default.
It's kind of uncomfortable.
Right.
And so, situations, you can turn a no into yes doing various things. You could show them your work. You could, there's a lot of different tactics you can use. But out in the field, I approached this man in the image, and he said no. And I didn't have my work. I didn't have a portfolio. And quite frankly, I don't think he would care about my portfolio. This man.
Remember, Bruce Davidson said he used to carry a little album with him of his work.
Oh, is that what he does?
Yeah, and like the guy in the subway train. He said it was an old wedding album, and he had his photos in there. And remember the scary gang guy in the subway? He said, "No, don't take my picture." And he said,
And then
"Well,
he
look,
showed-
here's
oh,
my
I remember
picture."
that, yes.
And the guy said, first of all, it's in a wedding album, so it's kind of like, it's not intimidating. But then the photos are great. He goes, "Oh, hey, you're good. You
You're
could make
actually
me look
You
good."
and then I would like a picture of myself.
Exactly.
So it could be carrying around on your iPhone, different things, different tactics. In this situation, I didn't have any of that stuff with me. So what I did is I didn't press too much on him, because if you press too much, then it really becomes a no.
Right.
I just moved on, and I ended up photographing people around him, people that have no interest in photographing, but just building that rapport. And he watched me and he studied me, and then eventually he actually came up to me and said, "Actually, will you take my photograph?"
And what a great picture it is.
And then this was the result.
Yeah.
So it just comes down to granted, if no means no, obviously be respectful. But knowing that if a person is just unsure of you or unaware of your intentions or just needs to feel you out, giving them that space, and because it could be good for both of you.
How many shots did you take of this guy? I always have wondered this. Because this is such a
I don't know. I actually
perfect
didn't
picture.
take that many.
See, I knew.
It didn't take a lot with him. I knew I wanted it to be close.
Right.
And
So great.
And I also, because he had said no initially, I didn't want to
Overdo it.
press my luck.
But the guy has hate tattooed on his knuckles.
Yes.
Right? I mean, this is a guy who probably does say no a lot. and then the crinkling around his eyes, there's just something magical about this photo. It's one of my favorites of yours.
And you get that too. I see people, happen in Norway actually, where you find a face and you know it's going to be a beautiful image.
Yeah.
You know it in your heart and soul. And it's worth making yourself uncomfortable and spending the time sticking around trying to get that shot.
Now, this guy was a farmer in Tasmania, right?
Coal miner.
Coal miner.
Former coal miner.
Ah,
So.
right. But he's from down under, as is our guest today.
Yes, he is. She is.
Yeah.
There you go. So, interestingly enough, our guest is world-renowned for her architectural photography, but photography is not her first passion.
Really?
No.
Welcome to
So,
Shannon McGrath.
Shannon McGrath, welcome to TWiT Photo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
What is your number one passion? What brought you to the medium of photography?
I would have to say it's the form of architecture and interior spaces itself. I never really had the intent to be a photographer. So basically, from day dot, back in the day, I was studying fine art of all things, and ceramics was my major, so totally away from photography. But architecture was the one main true subject that stuck with me at that time. So when I ventured out of the fine art course, I sort of found myself traveling around the world and tending to want to photograph buildings and spaces and things like that. So I just sort of naturally fell into it. And that way it sort of became a bit of a passion and a way forward for me to sort of get involved in architecture was to do photography. So that was the path that started me off. And from that point, I went straight into studying I guess the basic techniques of photography. I remember when I went into my first class, I didn't even know what an SLR camera was. So it was quite a surprise for everyone to see me in a photography class, but I was determined and, sure that that's what I wanted to do. And so from henceforth, it was just all about, learning my technique and getting that down pat and getting out into the field.
And when it comes to learning your technique with architecture, what do you feel were the most valuable lessons that you needed to learn when you were initially at that place where you're, hey, I love architecture, I want to explore architecture through this medium of photography. What do I need to learn? What's the core first steps?
Well, basically, it's sort of technical. Your equipment is quite different to maybe your standard sort of portraiture photographer. You would most probably, in the day we were shooting transparency and film, and that's what I learned on. I'm very thankful for that time that I actually got to shoot a lot of film and transparency, because it's now sort of all shifted to digital. So the main point, I think my hero camera at the time was what we call a 5.4 camera, which, you would have your 5.4 transparency that you'd load up in your dark slide and sort of put in the back sort of, if you imagine in the romantic days of, the big cameras with the dark cloth over your head and, the ground glass on the back of the screen. So that was a vital tool for me in the sense that the reason why we use these cameras is because it had movements. And when we're shooting architecture, the main thing is to get your horizontal lines and vertical straight. So most cameras that you shoot on don't have any shift in the lenses at all. So they, you sort of, when you're shooting a building, you tend to sort of find that it converges or diverges depending if you're looking up or looking down at it. So what the 5.4 camera did was you could shift a film plane or the lens up and down or left to right. And that way you were actually straightening the horizontals and the verticals by doing this and getting those beautiful architectural shots. So that was one of the very first key elements of shooting architecture, was to learn about shift lenses and vertical lines and horizontal lines and making sure that they were all very, very straight. And then the second thing would have to be light. So with the light, it really depends on, it's really key, it's essential. It's all about the time of the day that you're shooting it, finding out about, whether it was an east or a west or a north-facing building or even south, and making sure that you were there at the time of the day. So if it was east, you'd be up very early into, sort of this dawns and the sunrises, waiting for that sun to come up with your camera. And if obviously the west-facing facades, you'd be sort of out there in your late afternoon sunsets with your dusk shooting away. So I think they're the two key things would be, understanding light and the times of the day that you need to shoot. And then the other part of it would be your equipment.
It's all in this picture on my screen right here. If this were, if I took this picture, those columns would be looming over me, about to fall over.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Did you use tilt to fix that, or did you get on the ladder?
I'm standing on the ground, and I've just got a 35mm in my hand with this shot. And basically, I saw the light, and I just saw the position. And I think I had at the time a 24mm tilt shift on my camera, and basically you just sort of rack up the camera to its full maximum. And that's the beautiful thing about the Canon I've got a Canon 1DS Mark III, and you can have there's quite a few tilt shift lenses in the series. So you just sort of rack it up and you get all those lovely, beautiful
straight lines.
verticals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love
So-
the light here and the candle. So that is another example of just knowing exactly what you wanted when you shot this.
Well, it's also just sensing it, really. We were travelling. This is actually shot in Copenhagen in a beautiful church there. And we were just sort of driving from church to church, just having a look at the architecture more than anything. And it was actually a beautiful experience. We walked in, and in the middle of the church, there was this tiny circle of mothers and babies singing, having a mother's group singing these songs in this church. So we just started wandering around, and I just pulled my camera out. I wasn't too concerned about sort of, whether I could or I couldn't. And I just sort of started shooting and having a look and just feeling the space. And that's actually a really lovely way to shoot, because you're not sort of working towards a brief, or you don't have, the design brief from an architect or an interior designer with you. So that's why I think those kind of shoots are really quite lovely, just to sort of feel what's in the space and sort of, take your time and have a look around and see what's happening. And that's what you get.
I was going to say that Shannon didn't have to worry about buildings saying no, but I guess the people who own the buildings could say no,
No, that's it. So it was quite lovely.
Beautiful shot.
Yeah, thank you.
So when you're talking about perspective and shift lenses, are you using shift lenses all the time? And maybe to people that don't know what a shift lens is exactly, could you explain what a shift lens is and why it's imperative for you to use in your work?
Okay, well, shift lens is, so I just pull one up here I've got. This is I don't know if you can see that quite clearly, but this is my 24mm shift lens. So basically it's a very straightforward lens. You can see these little knobs on the side of the lens here. And basically what they do is when you sort of move these, let's just loosen that off there for a second. And you can actually move, I don't know if you could see that very clearly, but I'll just wrap it down and you can sort of see there, it's a bit hard to see, but see how the bottom of the lens is shifted down. So that's what a shift lens does. It sort of moves the film plane up and down. And that way, that's how you get your verticals and horizontals. And you can actually twist the lens on the camera. So you can actually turn it around whilst it's on camera and do shift, on angles and all that sort of stuff. So basically, that's what a shift lens is. And you can get, I think the Canon 35 series have 4 shift lenses in their stock. There's the 17mm, which is very wide, beautiful, has no distortion. And then the 24mm, which is what I just showed you there. And then there's the 45 tilt shift. And then we have the 90mm shift. So that's what it does. It just sort of basically moves the film plane up. So you can actually sort of move without sort of pointing the camera forwards and backs. So yeah, it's a nice little series.
I've always wanted one, but they're so expensive. It's primarily for somebody shooting architectural shots, right?
Architecture, yes. Yeah. I mean, you can use them. They do have swing. So a lot of people do use them for, say, for example, if they're shooting food, they might use like the longer 90mm lens tilt shift, and they might sort of use that, when you want to drop the focus out into the background. So they'll sort of do a tilt, or they'll sort of throw the lens focus out, and that way they are basically, it's a soft focus. Instead of using depth of field, they use the movement of the lens.
Yeah, we've seen that's kind of a popular faddish kind of form of photography. Even your iPhone can do tilt shift now, where you stuff's in focus and out of focus. Makes things look like toys.
That actually begs the question, when it comes to new photographers, and what's the advantage? Obviously, if maybe you could explain getting it in camera with the lens versus doing it in Photoshop with all the tools that are available.
Same thing with the lines, because you could bend the picture to make it straight lines.
And there is nice, back in the old film days, very rarely did you do anything in Photoshop to your lenses. It was all in camera. And from learning to do things that way is totally beneficial to taking a shot. I think nowadays people tend to just go, that'll do, and we'll fix it up in post. But I actually believe that the less amount of work you do to an image in post, the better the quality of the image is going to be. Because when you start mucking around with images too much, you're actually moving pixels and you actually are degrading the quality of the picture. So I tend to do the shift as much as I possibly can and do as much as I can in the camera. To do the least amount of damage really on the other end is what I call it. You can get away with doing quite a bit in post, but you just have to be very careful that you aren't pulling it too much, because you do get, especially with the large buildings, it does fall off at the top and it gets a little soft if you transform it too much. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you do it as much in the lens, that's where the quality is. It's the glass, it's the lens, it's sort of what's happening in camera. And it just, that's the art of photography, is to basically, be able to do it mostly in camera, because that's what we do. We're photographers, and I think, you do have to take the time in shooting what's happening and positioning of every object and every line and every subject matter and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's my true belief. And waiting around the right light, etc.
Do you feel I'm assuming you use a tripod for almost all your work, or do you?
Everything, yes. Tripod and camera, absolutely. Most of my exposures are quite long exposures, so you can't have any kind of sort of movement. It's architecture and interior photography. It really have to be quite clean. I mean, there are other ways of shooting it where you can have a little bit of movement, but generally for architecture interiors, always on a tripod. So just people want to see the clarity of a space, and they want to see the, what's happening in a space. And when you have movement, it just doesn't come across at all. So yeah, definitely a tripod. Definitely.
I think too, tripod slows you down.
Does slow you down, which is also good.
It's good.
It's good.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely, because each image you compose, you have to take the time to compose it. Generally, I'm working with an interior designer or an architect, and they're sort of getting me on a shoot to explain or portray the project in its absolute best light. And if you sort of run around, just snapping here and there, I don't think you really get to sort of feel the space or feel the environment that you're in. And that's the beautiful thing about what I do with my work, is that you take the time, you sort of make friends with the house, really, if I could sort of say it without being corny, for the day. And you watch the light and you see what's happening, and you see where the objects are sitting, and you see what would be the best angle for the camera to sit, and you wait. I mean, more often than not, I'll be sort of sitting on a corner, of a street, waiting for half an hour, just waiting for that light just to sort of come out, and there it is. So that's sort of how you work with the space. Other times it can be very frantic, chasing the light. It's amazing how quickly the light does move. And, sort of looking at a lot of my shots, I sort of wait to the perfect timing of when the light might touch a corner. So you get those when you're shooting, and you're actually thinking quite graphically, in the sense that you want to use the light to create texture and lines within, a graphic picture. So you might just sort of be sitting there waiting for that time for that light just to hit that corner, and then there's your shot kind of scenario. So, yeah, it's good. And I shoot, in all different kinds of light. I shoot, with bright sunny days, overcast days. You can get all kinds of different qualities of light with the different, types of sun and movement and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it does take some time, which is wonderful. I mean, some days some shoots I'll spend 3 days on, or some spaces I might actually be there for 2 weeks. Just, cover it all off and get the right light and do all that. So, yeah, it's fantastic, and it's light creates texture and pattern as well, which is what I love.
Let me ask you some technical questions. First of all, you said long exposures. How long?
Well, they vary. They can sort of be around sometimes, depending if it's a bright sunny day, 30th or 60th, thereabouts. Exterior, it's usually F16 at 1/25th is the usual.
You like a very crisp, very no depth of field. You want to see everything.
I like the detail from top to bottom.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will use depth of field, but that would be more on your interior spaces than with exterior work.
Well, here's a good example. This is a very long shot, and everything's in perfect focus, of course.
Yes, definitely.
Now, do you use lights? Because this must have been a difficult one to get.
No, very rarely do I use lights. This, sort of my light is the sun, basically. Right. And that's why timing of shoots is vital. It's just sort of understanding that the day, the light's going to come through at that time. If the edge of the building is facing west, then I might shoot that side of the building in the afternoon, knowing that I'm going to get some nice, light shards poking through. Sometimes we might just arrive at a space and you'll sort of catch something quite unexpectedly, and you'll just like whip out the camera, get it set up pretty quickly, and then shoot, get stuck into shooting. So the daylight and light is essential. Everything about it is essential with the light. So more often than not, that if they want what we call a blue sky shoot, is that I'll sort of book it in, but if it's not quite right or it's an overcast day, the shoot will actually get cancelled, and we will go back and do it again. And sometimes it can take about a week, 2 weeks to get the right day to get into a space to get that light. So it is you have to have a lot of patience with what I do, and it's fantastic. And that's what I enjoy about it, because they're the qualities. You see in this picture here, you can see how using the light actually creates different patterns and textures and brings in more of an emotion into the shot. Otherwise, you've got, a beautiful white staircase, but it's just those extra layering of that light that sort of transforms it into, because you're shooting three-dimensionality and translating that back into a two-dimensional plane, and to try and bring that three-dimensionality back into that photograph. It's all about light and form and all those interesting things. But I don't always shoot with sunny light. Occasionally I will shoot with very overcast days, and it gives you a very, very different quality of light. So that can also be just as beautiful. Like in some of my interiors, just the softness of the light can just wrap around objects quite beautifully, and you just get those very lovely, lovely even tones of light. So yeah, you can sort of see here, this is a little bit softer, and it just gives a different feel to the quality of light. So, and magazines love that kind of feel as well, because they're not struggling with contrast and issues with deep shadows and strong highlights. Yeah.
How do you determine, whether you're going to go for that direct sunlight or you're going to go for that overcast?
Definitely exterior work, always generally sunlight, and then we just work with the interiors. Possibly if I'm shooting for an architect in comparison to an interior designer, there might be a bit of a difference there. So it's just a different feel. A lot of the time, interiors, we just go with we might book it in, and we'll just go with what's going on. It's just the external work that it's vital that I get the right light. So here I'm introducing a little bit of the ambient light of the actual space. So I do work with both, and I think mainly interiors it can go either way, the soft light or the more contrasty light. But external work pretty much always has to have that beautiful sun happening to sort of bring that forward. So, yeah, and the beautiful thing about interiors is it's about the space, but it's also about the way they've styled it, the way the objects have been placed in it, and the textures and the detail, and, all the extra little bits that, I sort of enjoy shooting, and placement of objects. So you really do need to have a bit of a graphic eye when it comes to all of this kind of shooting. And it's also very important to understand that when you're shooting, you're thinking about the magazine layout and how they might actually lay it on a page. and where they actually might sort of put the font in an image or a heading, all that sort of stuff. So that will, also determine how I shoot, whether it's portrait or horizontal.
And going back to the light thing,
yes,
it's fascinating. So you wait sometimes up to 2 weeks or a week for the perfect light. Have you ever tried using strobe, and why do you feel natural light is so much better that you would actually wait 2 weeks versus doing it in a day where you can rely on strobe knowing exactly what it will produce at any given time?
Yeah, it's a good question. But for me, lighting, I mean, I do use lighting obviously in studio setups where I'm working with product and all that sort of stuff. But whenever I've seemed to try to introduce light into a space, it just doesn't have the same kind of quality in my mind. The shadows maybe quite aren't as subtle and as nice. Just the subtlety of the light may not, be that way. And it's also, I think, when you're just shooting with natural light, you can feel a space a lot better. Whereas when, this sort of shot, there's, to get those lines and the strength of that light, and most of the time the spaces around the houses are tight. There's literally a wall right outside your window, and there is no way that you would be able to get backlighting into a space like that. That would have to use some serious equipment for that kind of thing. And, obviously budgets don't warrant that sort of, expense when you can just sort of go in and shoot it with the natural light. So, but it's only, we live in Melbourne here, and it's we tend to get, sometimes we get some weeks where it just might be rain day after day after day, and there's just no way you can shoot it. Sometimes, in an overcast day, if you get some really beautiful moody skies, you could do some really interesting stuff. So, but most of the time externally, definitely waiting for light. But internally, it could be either. So like this was, again, a very overcast day, and this is where I'm using longer exposures, and I'm using, I think it would be about maybe a second or something like that. And sometimes I'll go into spaces and I'll be shooting for 15 seconds or 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And, the space will be almost not quite black, but just enough light in the space that will show you that you can just get the light to wrap around it. And I think you could safely go up to about 30 seconds to get an image. So that's, again, the tripod, you would not be able to shoot that handheld at all.
I could see that you were a sculptor, because everything is very you mentioned you're in a two-dimensional medium, and everything is very three-dimensional.
Yes,
you use shape, you use distance, and it just comes alive.
Yes, and I think definitely my fine art days definitely has helped me in that regard. It's definitely helped me with just understanding space and two-dimensionality and three-dimensionality. And I think that's one of the things that definitely attracts me to what I do, is sort of moulding spaces and forming spaces and, all that kind of work, and placement of objects. Mm-hmm. Not only do we wait with the light, but we think about, where all the chair legs are going to sit, where the table is going to sit on the edge of a rug, how a plant is just going to fall over the edge of a shelf, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So it's all about placement of objects and just, again, using that graphic eye to sort of understand what you're doing. And this is a perfect example of that kind of a shot, where you have, your very overcast days, so the light is quite moody and soft. And then the stools, there's not much in this shot, but it's like 3 stools and then 2 stools, and then placing them all in exactly the right position, just to sort of, make something interesting out of it. So, yeah.
So you adjusted those stools just so.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Everything.
And you don't always have the luxury of working with a stylist. A lot of times you're doing this on your own. What are tips for people that are styling their own set in an interior space?
Simpler the better, first of all. I think Sometimes if you're trying to shoot a space and there is too much stuff in a space, it can overclutter and you're not quite sure where your eye is going to go. So you actually need to sort of start off with a nice clean palette, I think, and then you introduce your objects into it and you think about what you're shooting and you think about the idea of what you're shooting if you're trying to portray a space, and just placement. I think, no matter if you're doing portraiture or architecture or food or anything, it's all about, the placement of the objects within the frame, and whether you're going to be shooting wide or whether you're going to be shooting on a long lens, you can, just sort of think about how you want, the space to be. Usually with the wider angle lenses, you'll be sort of standing either at the edge of the room or the corner of a room, and you'll sort of be trying to get everything into a shot. But just think about where the light's coming from, think about what's in the room, and just, simplify it and just have a few beautiful objects or, within the space, and then use the light to sort of just wrap around. Don't be afraid to do longer exposures, and don't be afraid to sort of, if it is low light, just, give it a go and shoot that. And the nice thing about shooting on long lenses is that the difference between your wide angle and your long lens is that your wide angle, you can actually start to distort objects in the corners of the frames, which to me isn't very pleasing.
I noticed all your angles are perfectly right angle. You don't have any curvature.
No, and I tend not to shoot diagonally. I shoot quite elevational. So it's a sort of a bit of an architect's term where they sort of shoot you sort of very square to the subject, very much so, yes. Right. That's my personal style. Sometimes I will shoot diagonally if it works. Like I think in the next series, a couple of images that with this particular project, say for example this one, that I will shoot across a table or back into a space just to get some depth into a space. And, they're lovely objects that lead your eye around the image. And for me, that's what's important, is how the eye is to be led. And then again, the long lens, you can go in for the detail, but you're actually quite far back from that object, because the way by standing quite far back from the object and using a long lens is it actually makes it look more natural, and you don't get any distortion on the edges with that. So there's that changeover. You tend to go into a space and you sort of shoot the wide angle, what I call the wide angle, the middle ground, and then the detail. And if you can get those, this is more of a middle ground.
That's a perfect example. You've zoomed in on the middle ground to get that shot. Yeah.
So, and people like layers. People like to see the layers of a space. People like to see the overall picture, which is your wide angle. Which maybe on the first one or there. I think if you go forward a few images.
There's the overall, yeah.
And that's another project. Yeah. But and then you sort of go into the middle ground, which is this sort of thing, and then the detail. And magazines tend to like that kind of idea to give people a feeling and emotion. They want to see the big picture. They want to see the middle ground, and they want to see the detail of the space. So I think in the next picture, that go forward.
Oops, here we go.
Yeah. So that's generally, this is another project. Again.
You go to such interesting looking places. It must be so much fun.
Oh, I love what I do. Yeah. It's I work with interior designers and architects, and they're all doing wonderful things. And there's all kinds of levels of work where budgets vary from very little budgets to quite big budgets, and often it doesn't matter what the budget is. Often, sometimes the small budget projects are sometimes a little more interesting to shoot because they want to be a little bit more creative.
Like this one. This is hysterical. I love it.
This was actually this was a project done in Sydney actually by the interior designer Second Guthrie. And they do beautiful work. I love working with them. They always have a certain style. Their detail is quite beautiful. They sort of, have a clean palette. This is also their work in a display suite. So they, just have a really clean eye, and the craft that comes through in their work is beautiful. And that's what I also love about what I do, is seeing the craft that people produce, in objects and spaces, and the feeling that they sort of portray across, which is wonderful.
You're documenting somebody else's art, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I do. I'm a glorified documenter. Yes, I don't actually buy shots. I kind of look at this work and I just sort of think I'm doing beautiful shots of work that, other designers
of art.
have done.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but if I took it, it wouldn't be so beautiful. You're definitely
It's taking it to the next level.
You're adding to it.
Yeah, definitely. We talk about the wide angles, and I think one of my least favorite things for wide angle shots is when the distorted, how I'm trying to make the room look bigger than it is.
And vignetted.
Vignette it.
Yeah.
What are some tips of how to use wide angle correctly?
Just be careful with without maybe going too crazy on the wide angles. Some photographers like that kind of way of shooting. For me, I personally, because I don't. It's nice to get the overall picture, but for me, it's a bit of a story and the levels. So just be careful not to go too wide. And if you are going to go wide, just make sure that the picture or the objects in the foreground are sort of quite not too close to the lens. If they're further back from the lens, then that's okay. Then they don't seem to distort. See, none of these shots really are wide angles shots. Maybe if you go, again, this is more sort of detail, working with interior designers, all that sort of stuff. So this is a wide angle shot. So you can actually get some lovely dramatic, I tend to use my wide angle a lot more on external work than I do on internal work. I think in the next picture, it might be, this is an example from the image to the magazine cover, how they might then use that image to lay out their text.
This was made for them. That was
yes.
Although they've completely modified the image, it looks like.
They've cropped it, which I don't mind. I have no qualms about magazines, whatever suits the page and the layout. A lot of photographers can get quite precious about that. No, don't crop my image. So that, it's architecture and it needs to sit in a layout, and there's a certain format, and they need to sort of do that. Maybe with people's personal artwork, it's a different story with cropping, maybe not such a good idea, but with architecture and sort of laying it out in magazines, it's definitely the way to go. I think in the next image along was again a wide angle, so you can get beautiful skies.
This is obviously wide.
Yes.
Yeah. But
so you can see how that sort of captures everything, the whole idea. And also you can get some nice drama, again, a nice wide angle for an interior, because architecturally that's what it's sort of demanding in the image. So, and this is just an example, again, of the same project in a layout. So
your stuff lends itself so well. They must love you to this kind of thing.
Yeah, for text and design.
Yeah, you just have to think about these sort of things when you're shooting, because at the end of the day, that's where they want their images. They, most of the designers want to get published because that's a huge marketing tool for them.
Do you do your own stuff, or is it all editorial?
No, I do my own stuff. I've the last decade or so has been working commercially. Again, this is an example of more of a layout. Yeah, it's the images and how they lay it all out. But I do my personal stuff. I think there are a couple of images in there somewhere towards the end, and I sort of managed to want to. Because I am documenting beautiful spaces for, other designers and other architects, it's important that you continue to sort of shoot for yourself.
Right.
In the beginning of your career, you're all very excited and it starts off as a passion, and almost a hobby turns into a passion, turns into a career. So, which, in the long run, it becomes a business, which is great, and I love it. I'm very fortunate to be doing this from a day-to-day basis. But but you do need to, you know, being a creative person, you do need to shoot for yourself. You need to continue doing that. And I think one sort of offsets the other quite beautifully.
Do you ever take pictures that are messy and people all over them? Because this stuff almost feels ironic. It's so depopulated and square. It almost feels ironic. And I'm wondering if your personal stuff is very messy and
no, messy. It's very dark, actually. It's
interesting.
The opposite. Yeah, it's. I do shoot people in spaces. So, you know, I guess I'm the sort of a crossover between interiors, architectural.
There's a person, and a person's moving.
Yeah, so this is sort of what we would do in a space, is that the people would be incidental to a space. They wouldn't be, you know, the focus or the portrait of a space. It would be more the idea of the people living in the space. And magazines, the trend at the moment, it's going more towards that idea. But it's actually also very hard to shoot a space with people,
especially in long exposures.
Definitely,
especially it is, and that's and that's the thing. And also because we go in and we do quite a bit of styling. We are, you know, for a day we are coming into someone's space and they're very generously allowing us in and doing what we need to do. So we do shoot people in space, especially if I'm shooting commercial spaces. Generally, we'll shoot with people in the space. And restaurants, you know, I will shoot. There's just the same image, for example, with the other layout and the font in the beginning.
Right.
And so I do enjoy it. But my personal work is, it's the opposite to what I shoot commercially. I do tend to sort of take all light out of it and almost devoid it of the subject matter. I think there's a few shots possibly coming up. There's some more shots. But, designers like to see the space. They like to sort of feel and see the space.
You want to get out of the way. You're not making a statement here.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So this is a perfect example of a dusk, what we call a dusk shot, where it's that beautiful 10 minutes of the evening where it just transitions from day into night, where the lights of the interior start to emanate out and the reflections from the exterior on the glass start to disappear, but there's still enough light in the sky that you get those rich blues and purples happening. And this is a favourite. You know, time with architects and interior designers to get that beautiful transition, because usually during the day it's quite contrasty and you can't really see into the space. So the dusk, I'm often standing there very late at night waiting for the dusk shot. The coat on, hat on, gloves on. So it's just to get that beautiful shot. So
this is gorgeous. And I love how the leaves in front and in the foreground are lit from below.
That's it. And it's also, again, creating that sense of, you know, depth. Rather than doing it through focus, I do it through objects in that sense. So it's just a different way of shooting.
Since everything's in focus.
When you say long, though, how long is the long lens on something like this? I mean,
this wouldn't be a long lens. This would be quite wide.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
This would be, I think, at least the 24 tilt shift, or most probably the 17 mil tilt shift on that. Yeah. 17 is a fantastic lens. There's no distortion whatsoever on that. So. And the nice thing about 35 mil is it is quick. You can move quickly. So if the sun's moving and you have to move quickly, you can move quickly with it. I do have another camera. I have an Alpha with a P65 back and a 40 mil and a 23 mil, but it's a lot slower in its way of shooting. And you don't have a viewfinder like you do with the Canon. So I tend to use my larger format camera for more my personal work. Rather than with my commercial work. So again, interior, this is retail. Again, we would take half the shop out of stock to get the shots.
You never want a crowded shop,
no, exactly.
right? Yeah.
You need that feeling.
If there's too much stock, it's too cluttered. This is going back to what I was talking about earlier. If you put too much stuff in it, it's just overbearing and can sort of take away from the image, and they're interested in the space.
Right.
Do you start taking stuff out, or do you start with a blank slate and then start putting objects in?
No, we take stuff out generally. We look through a space, We'll see what's, stays and what might go, and then we take it out, and then we might introduce other things back into it. So, and it's all about really the designer's ideas at the end of the day. And sometimes, unfortunately, with the budgets, they might have the budget for the space, or especially with the residential stuff, they might have the budgets to build the house and get the house, but they've usually come from another style of a house into a new house, and it might not quite marry with the furniture. So they just haven't gone that extra step. So we might just actually take some of the furniture out, and then the designer, they do have a vision and they have an idea. And really, at the end of the day, people aren't going to see the house. They're not going to sort of see the space. So the photograph becomes really the most vital thing after a project finishes, because that's what they have for history. That's what they have for, forever. And it becomes a bit of a nice sort of series of images for them to keep over time in their portfolios. So I'm not really sort of fussed if they have to put what they need to put in to get their idea across, to portray a good image. Yeah.
And when there's no boss, this is what Shannon takes. This is a personal, as you said, very dark.
Yes, very dark. Yeah. This is where I will shoot, and then I will literally take out all the extra pieces around it. I'm not interested in location. I'm not interested in scale. I'm not interested in the blue skies. I'm just interested in the texture and the feeling, and just allowing the objects to just reveal themselves through that darkness. I sort of look at it as a bit of an exterior skin, sort of moving forward into the image, and just allowing just the very subtleties of light just to come through. So as you can see, it's a complete reaction against my work.
This looks like is this a Frank Gehry building?
It does look like Frank Gehry.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the Guggenheim.
Oh, it's the Guggenheim.
It is,
Bilbao.
It looks a lot different through your eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
So that's what I'm sort of working towards nowadays, is doing more exhibition work and doing this kind of work, and just developing the artistic side of my practice. And like I say, I think it complements my commercial side, and sort of trying to sort of get that emotion into the pictures and that idea. But at the end of the day, it's all still just architecture. Yeah. So,
yeah. You're making me want to run out and get that 17 tilt shift. I gotta stop doing that.
The chat room said too, I know it is really expensive.
You can rent it, yeah.
But is it Carvazone? I don't want to say it wrong. In chat room, thank you for mentioning this. But you can rent them in the U.S. anyway for $51 a week.
It's nothing.
So that's nothing, and you can get out and play and see if that is something you want. And if it is, you save and save and save and get it.
Yeah.
But, I had one other question for you. As far as there's a lot of dynamic range in your images, are you compositing? They don't look like you're using HDR. What are you doing to sort of get that?
Between the highlights and the shadows.
Yes.
I do bracket, and I do layer images in. I don't use the HDR in Photoshop. We sort of merge the images to get the highlights and the shadows. Back in the day of transparency, we used to sort of have to use, this is where lights were definitely far more important, because we had to get light into the shadow detail. And with transparency, it was literally one frame. You had no chance, it just had to happen that way, which was a beautiful way of shooting, which I really enjoyed. And I'm glad I had that experience shooting that way, because it made me understand about light and what you could do to manipulate light and how you could change things. Nowadays, for example, I will shoot for the highlights and I will shoot for the shadow detail. And I do use the reflector, which is, a large disc type reflective disc that just sort of pops out, and I reflect light back into spaces. We're catching the 45-degree angle of the sun back into a space. And then we do composite them, and we sort of layer them in to get that contrast, but we still allow the highlights and the shadows and the depth. We don't do it too evenly.
You're not tone mapping and trying to make it look like a Trey Ratcliffe or something. This is a perfect example, which would be an impossible shot unless you did it that way. The deep hall is obviously going to be too dark if you expose for the foreground brightness.
That's right. That's correct.
Yeah.
So yes, we do a bit of post, but that's the only real post we'll do. And the only other little bit of post we'll do is we might, get rid of a GPO or an exit sign or something like that. So, but nothing more major than that. It's pretty straightforward when we work, on the images after the fact. So that's all we do really in post. But, at the end of the day, you want a beautifully contrasty, colour balanced image. And when you shoot a raw image on digital, it doesn't provide that. So you do need to do that work, definitely.
On average, how are you going one stop and how much, what is the depth for bracketing? And then also typically how many layers are in each composite?
I would bracket almost, depends if the sun, I would almost bracket 2.5 stops either way. And compositing would only be maybe 2 to 3 images.
Okay.
It will usually be one overall image, and then we'll choose either a highlight or a detail. Most of the images will be, they will be balanced in one image. It's just a few details that I might want to bring back into the highlights. And especially when you're shooting from internally to externally, with the windows outside, I do bring in a little bit of detail from the windows outside, but I don't do it too strong because then it doesn't look real. It sort of, what I call, without being offensive, you sort of, a lot of the real estate shots that you see around, people bring it in, it's sort of almost like a backdrop that they've just sort of dropped behind the window, and it just doesn't quite look real to me.
Yeah.
So I cut that right back a little bit to make it look more natural and as you would have seen it as you were standing in the space. So that's all I'm really doing at the end of the day, is I'm just taking it back to what it felt like when I was in the space.
Right.
Yeah.
Giving it the dynamic range your eyes would have as opposed to what the film had. Did you ever shoot film, or have you only shot digital?
Oh no, definitely shot film. For years I would have shot film.
Yeah, 4x5.
Yeah.
4.5, had a Hasselblad, which was a beautiful camera, the Hasselblad with 40mm. I've shot 35mm, but mainly the Hasselblad and the 5.4 were my 2 main cameras, and I loved it. I miss it, actually. It's quite strange. You sort of develop a bit of a relationship with film. And I'm still slightly struggling with digital in the sense that, the film that you used to be able to get, which you used to be able to buy a film called Velvia. Yes, and I'm sure you can still get it on the market today. I'm not so sure. I haven't shot on it for quite a few years now, but the blue skies in Velvia were rich and saturated and stunning, and you didn't have to do anything with them, whereas with the digital blue skies I struggle with. It hasn't got the same kind of depth. So, I'm still working back towards get that blue sky Velvia happening, so and get the depth with the digital. But, there are advantages and disadvantages for both, I would say. The digital is fantastic because the workflow is better, and it's more seamless, and you can actually shoot. I spend a lot more time now shooting rather than, being in the studio. I do have a producer who does a lot of my retouching, and so she's been working with me for about 3 years now, and she's fantastic. She understands my style and my aesthetic and how I shoot, and I can literally now just drop a job off to her and she'll just know what to do, and then I generally check it and make a few adjustments because I'm the one that knows what's happened in the space and the colour and the detail and the texture. So it's good. It's definitely a process in that sense, but I do miss the film days. Maybe one day I'll do another series on my 5.4, but I will never sell my 5.4 camera. Yeah. So it will always be. You sort of make friends with your cameras. It's quite weird.
I know, I can't get rid of mine either. I never touch them, but they're all there. Yeah.
Here's a couple more of these are the ones you said were your favorites. These are obviously personal work.
Yeah, this is just where I'm playing a little bit more with the abstraction of an image and the light. Sometimes I will go in and might not actually be the image, but I might actually crop into an image and see where the detail is. which is quite lovely. And the black and white's always quite lovely. It's nice to, abstract an image a little bit. I think there's another one image in there. That one, this is my Balti Bridge. This is what I call my Jeffrey Smart image. This was taken, back in my assisting days. This would have been about 14 years ago now. And this was shot on film on Velvia and with my little Hasselblad. And the great thing about my job also is that you get access to places before the public gets access to places, and you get to go up on the bridges and roofs and up cranes and, all kinds of crazy places just to get these shots before, because now there's no way you'd be able to get this image. This is like highway traffic going through this bridge. And so you get these rare opportunities as a photographer to sort of get in there and basically shoot and have the freedom just to wander around and shoot. And this is a perfect example of manipulating colour temperature in an image, which I, like to do as well, in the sense that, to our eye, this would have looked white. But by shooting on daylight film, the real colour temperature was a fluorescent, which turns green on film.
Right.
So this is, what I loved about film was just those natural elements that we don't see as the human eye, but the film actually picks up as the reality and creates these sort of colours and, these images. Whereas now with digital, we tend to sort of either shoot, we can shoot between daylight and tungsten and mostly auto, but it sort of cancels out a lot of these, mishaps. And that's sometimes the images, the ones where the mistakes, or the ones where you just allow what's really happening to happen, are sometimes the best images to have.
Shannon McGrath, it's been great. You can hardly see this one.
This one's dark, yes. This may be the layering. This is where I'm really taking out all of the light, and I'm,
It looks
really just swinging the.
It's so
binary.
bizarre how just
Yeah.
the contrast between her
Yeah, I love
personal.
it.
But it's still a building, and there's still and
The lines are all straight still.
they're all straight. You betcha. So yeah, it's good. I enjoy what I do with my work, and hopefully, I'll be shooting more of this kind of stuff.
It's great. I love it. Shannon, such a pleasure to meet you. Shannon McGrath. Do you have a website you want to push people to? Or
I do.
anything?
It's www.shannonmcgrath.com.
And it's spelled M-C-G-R-A-T-H.
Yes.
CGRATH. Yes.
C-G-R-A-T-H, for those of you who don't know how to spell Scottish.
Yeah, like me. I would have definitely said her name wrong, so thank you.
And I think we've brought the server down. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Shannon. So nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And
Thank you.
at 6:30 in the morning, you pulled it off well.
Thank
Now
you.
the sun's up, so you can go out and shoot.
I know.
That's right. Well, it's an overcast day here today, so we'll see.
Go back to bed then.
That's right.
Exactly. Take a little nap.
Excellent.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
Great to meet you.
No worries. Bye.
We do TWiT photos on Tuesdays, about 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 Eastern Time, 20:30 UTC. I had to do the math in my head. It's like that.
You always have to. I have a quick share too.
Yes, this looks good.
I don't know
We're big fans of Vince Laporte.
Yeah, I love Vincent Laforêt. He's been on the show. I can't remember what episode, but if you want to check it out, this book is incredible. The reason I love it is it's a huge resource, from a learning standpoint. But the way it's laid out, you can read it by section, which is for having just on your coffee table and picking up. He does these little excerpts. So, for example, I'll just pick some. It says finding order in chaos, and then it shows an image and it gives a little description of how he does that. And so if you're like me and don't actually have time to sit down and read a full book, but like to flip through and be inspired and learn things, here's another one showing the other side, which I think is really, a lot of photographers have talked about that, showing both sides of a story. And anyhow, it really just is a great resource, keeping you inspired, learning things in little bites. And you could read, of course, you could just sit and read through the whole book. But for me, I personally like the fact that it's done that way. And you can also, he has a DVD too, so it could be done on your
And there's
computer.
an ebook. There's an ebook version of this too, so you could look at it on your computer. It's all from Peach Pit Press, New Writers.
So,
Neat.
yeah, it's a
Neat.
great
It's called
resource.
Visual Stories Behind the Lens with Vincent Laforêt. I think we should do a book pick every week. I like that. Great photography books.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Catherine Hall, catherinehall.net. To find out more about her work and to read her blog, just click the blog link.
Yes, there you go.
catherinehall.net.
Thanks
for joining
everyone.
us. We'll see you next
Thanks for joining
time
us. See you next week.
on TWiT Photo.